He found the charter in a strip of light when morning had barely entered the scriptorium. A narrow box under a stone slab, dark wax with a fragment of a ring, and on it the very seal that he had worn around his neck all his life as a simple, meaningless trinket. The black monk realized that he was looking at a document that would change more than the size of his cell and the bread in his bowl. He realized that it would change the way of life in the villages, the flow of grain, and the right to ring the bell that called people to court and to celebrations. I welcome everyone who is listening to this story. I am glad you are with me. Write in the comments where you are watching from. It is important for me to know how far from the Abbey walls this story can be heard. I wish you pleasant listening. Until that day, he lived like many brothers. Early rising, the warm smell of malt from the brewery, the slow ringing of bells, field work, a little parchment, a few apothecary jars. His name was Brother Martin. He wore a simple linen rope instead of a belt, did not argue, did not strive for anything but silence. Only the old stones and the elderly cook remembered his childhood. The cook once said that he had been brought in on a trough in winter, covered with sheep's wool, and registered as an orphan. A flat fragment of a ring tied with a strip of coarse cloth was left around his neck. No one saw any significance in this because the abbot's guardian, Señor Osborne, already owned everything around him and spoke of orphans as if they were weeds on the edge of a field. An inventory was scheduled after the old abbot's death. The death was quiet. Much was quiet that spring. The tender greenery on the shore, the gentle faces of the cranberry pickers, the neat stacks of clay pots in the storeroom. But there was a sense of emptiness in the silence. Without the old abbot, the grain counters made more mistakes. The shepherds argued louder with the tithe collectors, and Señor Osborne came more often than usual and sat longer at the chests. He said it would be useful to check the books. He said he would think about a new fence. He said more people were needed for the fish ponds. He spoke confidently and slowly, and the brothers remained silent. Martin, appointed as a copyist, examined the shelves with catalog labels. Each row contained account books, letters of privilege, lists of tenants, and notes on ship duties. His attention was drawn to a whitewashed section of wall where the lime had been applied unevenly. The stone below echoed hollowly. He found a small crack and pulled out a flat box. There was no lock, only dark wax under uneven carving. He carefully heated the wax with a candle, lifted the lid, and saw a charter. At first glance, it was an ordinary sheet. Dry words, clauses about borders, a mill on a stream, the abbot's powers. But at the end there was a mark. The seal matched the fragment of a ring that had dangled around his neck all his life. The same pattern with a falcon, the same notch on the edge. The charter stated that the lord and guardian of the abbey should be a representative of the family that founded the monastery. In the event of the death of the elder without sons, the rights pass to the next blood relative, even if he is accepted into the brotherhood. The paper was dated with words, not numbers. The year of Christ's birth was written out in full, with mention of the autumn fair and the cold nights. At the bottom was the signature of the former bishop and witnesses. Martin understood one thing. Lord Osborne's guardianship should have ended many years ago. He understood another thing. If he could prove his kinship, the abbey would gain independence. The peasants would receive stable rents instead of capricious levies, and no more purchased letters would be needed. But how could he prove his bloodline when winter had brought him there, and his only memory was the smell of sheep's wool? He went to the cook. The cook remembered how someone had knocked quietly at the gate in winter, how the gatekeeper, crippled after a fall, had said that the sacristan should be called, how a baby lay in a trough, covered with a thinly embroidered sheet. The ringspan had rotted away over the years, and the sheet had been given to the infirmary for bandages. The cook said that there was also a knitted bag with dry herbs, and a thread knot tied in a special way. According to the old midwife, in that area, children of noble women born out of wedlock were marked in this way so as not to lose contact if something happened. The midwife had long since left for another monastery, closer to the mountains. That same night, a small shed near the scribe's quarters burned down. The fire was quickly extinguished, but the smell of burnt straw lingered until morning. Señor Osborne arrived the next day earlier than usual. He inspected the scriptorium and said that the inventory needed to be expedited because strangers had appeared in the area, and paper liked order. He smiled, even though no one had said anything funny. He said he would bring new chests in the coming week. Martin hid the charter and a piece of sealing wax in the binding of an old psalter that no one but he was interested in. Then he went to the bell tower. Old bell ringer Ivo warmed his fingers over a clay bowl and listened to every step. Ivo didn't like to talk, but he could tell horses apart by their breathing and people by their gait. He nodded when Martin asked him to ring the bell at unusual times in the coming days, if something seemed wrong. Ivo always seemed simple and invisible, but he was able to see small details before others did. Martin set off to find the midwife. The journey took 2 days. He walked without any distinguishing features, like a simple brother, and did not reveal his destination. The midwife was still alive in the modest community. She recognized the knot made of threads and said that she had made it at the request of a young noblewoman who feared the wrath of her guardian. The midwife said that the boy had been taken away that same winter, when Lord Osborne's servant had been traveling around the district with news of new taxes and demanding household registers from the freemen. She mentally connected these events and whispered without pride that the boy's father was from the house of the Abbey's founder. The midwife did not remember the woman's face, but she described the mark on the sheet. A thin falcon above a hazel branch. When he returned, Martin began to gather information. He asked the village elders to tell him about that winter. One old man said that traces of expensive horseshoes had been found near the mill at that time. The cooper's wife said she had seen a traveling carriage with a falcon crest. A shepherd said that Lord Osborne's men had stopped at the gate and argued about how much oats were needed for the horses. Martin did not tell anyone about the seal or the charter. He said he was writing the history of the monastery for the autumn Memorial Day. People were happy to reminisce. Meanwhile, pages began to disappear from the Abbey's account books. Yesterday, the register showed a debt owed by one estate for fish, but today it was gone. The cellarer swore he hadn't touched it. The bookbinders threw up their hands in despair. At night, someone sneaked into the archive through the open gate, but stumbled upon the block and left. Ivo sounded the alarm twice with short blows, and these blows sounded as if the wind was pushing an unruly circle. There was also a simple, everyday thing that turned into a threat. A messenger came to the market with a basket of candles. He said it was a gift from a God-fearing widow and asked for a receipt. In the basket, they found candles with an obvious excess of oil and a strange smell of grass. In the evening, fabric caught fire in the workshop. Even though there was no open flame nearby, the candles smoked heavily and gave off a fume that made it difficult to breathe. Martin realized that such candles could easily blind the guard and open the necessary chests without unnecessary witnesses. The messenger disappeared as soon as he received the receipt. It soon became clear that the widow had not sent anything. While the brothers were dealing with the aftermath, 3 of Lord Osborne's men entered the village. They asked about a stranger in black who was interfering with the accounts. They had been seen at the Abbey gate, at the cooper's house, and at the tavern. They said that the Lord was concerned about order. Their words sounded gentle, but their hands were close to their scabbards. At the same time, a merchant from a northern city appeared in the area, trading in canvas, salt, and yarn. His name was Ludwig. He brought barrels of saltpeter and sacks of dyes on his carts. It was said that he paid his duties honestly, liked fair contracts, and could not stand long disputes. Seeing the messy stubs at the gate, he asked the gatekeeper what had happened and offered to quietly replace the dangerous candles with ordinary ones with good wicks and clean wax. His proposal was simple and kind, but something else proved to be more important. He said that he knew a craftsman from the cathedral city who could read seals and kept copies of the bishop's letters. Such knowledge was rare and cost money. Martin explained to Ludwig that he had a document that needed to be verified for authenticity. He did not mention the details, but the merchant heard more than was said. He said he could take Martin to the bishop's notary and vouch for him with a deposit. He said he had seen the Lord's men lurking at the Abbey gates and did not like it when rumors and threats replaced free trade on the road to the shop. They left after dark. Ivo rang the bell 3 short times, as if blessing their journey. The road followed the river, but then turned into a spruce-covered lowland where the fog blurred the contours. At a bend in the road, they were overtaken by horsemen. One of them looked back for too long. Ludwig ordered them to ride not along the trail, but across the wet meadow. This decision saved them from an ambush by the bandits. Hoofprints cut through the mud, but stood motionless, as if the men on horseback were waiting for orders. In the city, the notary spent a long time comparing the paper, holding it up to the light, feeling the wax, finding a tiny flaw in the seal pattern that could only have appeared on the original matrix, not on a forgery. He said that the department's archives contained a record of such a charter and a copy of the scroll, where the name of the younger relative was marked with a side note. He said that the names of the monastery's founders were connected to the house where Signor Osborne now lived. He said that when the elder died without sons, the rights did indeed pass to the younger by blood, even if he was a monk. Martin listened to these dry words and felt as if his legs had become someone else's. He realized that he had to step out of the shadow of the bookbinding table into the open space where people loved loud decisions and disliked those who doubted. He realized that he couldn't be late. One successful night for the Signor's people, and all the right books would speak with voices that didn't exist. At that time, the Abbey was in turmoil. The gatekeeper noticed small notches on the wall. Such marks were used by daring people in the area to mark favorable places for climbing. The cellarer found a strange rope with knots in the barn, which would help to throw the load to the other side. Ivo, remembering the agreement, rang the bell suddenly in the middle of the day. The brothers scattered around the courtyard as if on command. The Señor's men were found in the storeroom where the smell of new parchment hung in the air. They said they had come to pay for candles. Their words did not match the bags containing crowbars and hooks. They were taken outside the wall, searched, and their iron tools were confiscated. On the way to the gate, One whispered that he would soon return with a paper that would give him the right to open any door. By evening, the bishop's messenger arrived with a short letter. The letter said that on the first day after the upcoming Sunday celebration, a hearing would be held on the rights of the Abbey and guardianship. The venue was the bishop's court. The letter was simple, but it cut through the air. Martin returned with Ludwig to the Abbey at dusk. He brought a certified copy of the charter and a letter from the notary. He did not have time to rest before the cook called him to the brewery. There he found the very sheet with embroidery that had once been given away for bandages. The old scraps were used as a filter for grain, and on one edge a falcon above a hazel branch remained. The cook said he never threw away old pieces because the fabric was good, and the memory was no one's until someone asked about it. The same night, strangers crept up to the monastery fields. They lit fires against the wind so that the smoke would drift toward the storerooms. Ivo raised the alarm with a long howl. Shepherds from the nearest village came with clubs. The seigneur's men left without trying to set fire to anything. Rumors spread through the village that there would be a court case that would decide the fate of the taxes. People gathered in their yards, waiting to see what would happen next. On Sunday, after the service, Martin brought 2 bundles to the gate, a copy of the charter and a piece of cloth with a falcon on it. He did not tell the people everything, but he told them the most important thing. A trial had been scheduled in the city, and anyone who remembered that winter could confirm the horses' tracks, the arguments at the gate, and the marks on the cloth. He did not speak loudly. He spoke so that they would listen carefully, and the people listened. At that time, things were happening at Señor Osborne's house. His people were going through chests, taking out letters, changing covers, and correcting numbers. He sent messengers to the scribes, promising silver for quick hands. He said that it was harmful for monks to interfere in the affairs of walls and roofs. He said that taxes loved strong shoulders. He told his people that he had his own witnesses and his own copies. On the day of the trial, the square in front of the bishop's house was filled with people. Tenants came from distant farms, merchants came, a cooper and his wife came, even a jeweler, rare in those parts, who knew how to cut seals and swore that he had never worked for Osborne, came. Ivo came too, although no one had invited him. He stood in the shadow of a column and looked intently at the door. The bishop sat down on a bench. The notary laid out the papers. Señor Osborne placed his letters on the table. He said that the monastery was weakening without a strong hand. He said that guardianship had been extended by tacit agreement. He said that an orphan found in winter many years ago could not claim kinship where there was no marriage. His words were eloquent and confident. Then the notary showed the charter. He said that the seal matrix on the wax matched the ancient one preserved in the archives. He said that a copy was kept at the department. He said that custody rights passed to the next blood relative in the event of the death of the elder without sons. He said that the existence of a monastic vow does not cancel this right, but only obliges one to treat it as a service. He lifted the sheet with the embroidered falcon and told about the birthmark. The cooper's wife confirmed that she had seen a cart with a falcon that winter. The old man from the mill told about the expensive horseshoes and the dispute at the gate. The midwife sent a letter describing the knot of threads in the time of delivery. The jeweler showed a microscopic notch on the seal and explained that such an irregularity could not be accurately replicated without the original matrix. Ludwig said that he had vouched for the monk because he did not like it when the trade routes, which should be transparent, were overshadowed by fear. He said this without unnecessary pathos, as if counting coins and rolls of money. Senor Osborne listened without changing his expression. He said that letters could be forged, people could be bought, and memories could be bent in the desired direction. He said that the candles were a gift in honor of the saint, not an attempt to create smoke. He said that his people never broke locks. He looked confidently at the bishop. Then Ivo approached the table. He had never spoken in the square. He was considered hunchbacked and useless. He placed his old bunch of keys and a small knife on the table. He said he had found the knife under the wall on the night when the bell was ringing. A tiny letter was carved on the handle, a mark that blacksmiths put on weapons and tools. He said that he saw this mark every time on the iron in Senor Osborne's house, because the blacksmith there was the same one. Ivo did not accuse. He enumerated. He named the time of the blow, the number of steps from the gate to the barn, the number of knots in the rope. He spoke without embellishment. The square listened to a man it had not noticed for many years. His attention to detail became an anchor. The words of a simple bell ringer struck more softly than the bell, but more clearly than any speech. The bishop announced a break until morning. He said he would announce his decision in the morning. People dispersed like water through irrigation ditches. And only then did the most critical part of this story begin. During the night, someone slipped a package under the door of the cellarer. It contained a small bag of herbs and a note. The note said that if Martin renounced his claims, the Abbey would be given a new pond, and the peasants would be exempt from tribute for 3 years. The note smelled of the same herbs as the ill-fated candles. At the bottom was an unfamiliar sign. It was everyday blackmail, which might seem profitable if you looked a week ahead and didn't see the year. The cellarer brought the bundle to Martin. He calmly placed the note in the expense book, next to the symbol used to mark questionable amounts. He said he would give it to the notary in the morning. But they weren't the only ones who didn't sleep that night. A young brother from the kitchen, named Pierre, noticed a shadow moving near the infirmary. Pierre was always considered inconspicuous and slow. His hands always smelled of onions and garlic, and he was chased away from the yard when something heavy needed to be carried. But Pierre had a gift for counting quickly and accurately. He counted eggs without a basket, remembered the proportions of flour without a measure, and most importantly, could see a curved number by ear. He listened and realized that the footsteps near the infirmary did not match his brother's gait. He raised the alarm in the kitchen by banging iron on the table. This was a signal for the night watchman. The ringing of the bell woke everyone, but the banging in the kitchen called only those who were supposed to be there. The watchman caught 2 of them by the wall. They found hooks and parchment, with sketches of the storeroom plans on them. On one of the sheets, Pierre saw an incorrect fraction in the distance markings. He knew that only one senior clerk from Lord Osborne's house wrote like that. He had a habitual shift in his lines. He remembered this detail when he brought portions of soup to the clerk during last year's census. In the morning at the trial, the notary laid out on the table a charter, a piece of cloth, a letter from the midwife, a knife with a blacksmith's mark and a threatening note. Pierre said that the scribbles on the sheet of paper were the handwriting of the Lord's clerk. Ivo said that the key found on one of the detainees fit the old gate to the barn, which everyone thought had long been boarded up. Ludwig said he was willing to pay for the restoration of the fence if the court restored the Abbey's right to self-government. he explained it simply. A merchant benefits from an honest place between cities, and a monastery, with its rules and clear taxes, is reliable for trade. Senor Osborne did not back down. He said that the knife could have been lost by any of his servants long ago and did not prove anything. He said that the shotgun pellets on the sheet were an accident. He said that the merchant was guided by his own secret interests. He spoke confidently and stood up straight. Then the bishop asked about the sheet. He said that in such matters it was not only iron and numbers that mattered, but also origin. He said that if the boy found in winter came from the founder's house, then the right of guardianship passed to him. He said that a monastic vow makes power not personal, but official, and that this is good for the people. At that moment, a gray-haired woman entered the hall, leaning on a girl's arm. She was a widow who ran a tannery on the outskirts of town. She was rarely allowed into such places. She sent a note asking to be heard. She said that many years ago she had worked as a laundress in the house of the Abbey's founders. She said she remembered that winter because they were reupholstering the beds in the women's quarters and had ordered a special sheet with a falcon above a hazel branch. She said that a month after that order, talking about one room in the house was forbidden, and then that sheet was never seen again. She did not name names, but her words lined up with the midwife's knot and the embroidery on the scrap of cloth. This woman seemed like a stranger in the hall, but her word was equal to years of laundry work and connections with the house where the charter came from. Many in the square whispered that she was a person from the lower classes, but she spoke as if she held the key to the family. Her speech became the moment when hidden talent against status sounded like the main tone. She calmly listed who brought the laundry, the quality of the threads, and how the stitching pattern changed. She knew things that knights and scribes did not know. The bishop nodded to the notary. He signed the sheet. He announced that the court recognized the charter as authentic, and that the right of guardianship passed to Brother Martin as the closest blood relative of the founders. He set a deadline for the transfer of affairs. He ordered the books to be returned to their former state and forbade anything to be rewritten without the seal of the monastery and the signature of the notary. He added that Lord Osborne was losing the right to interfere in the affairs of the Abbey and would be held accountable for his attempts at covert pressure. The square was noisy, but the noise was not the noise of a celebration, but a sigh of relief. People understood the result in simple terms. Rents would become fixed, fish would be exchanged without levies, salt would be bought in the same places as before, but at a clear price. Shepherds were already dividing imaginary strips of land. Coopers were discussing orders. A woman from the tannery leaned on a girl's arm, listened to the air trembling nearby, and just stood there. Senor Osborne did not leave immediately. He said he would file a complaint with the metropolis. He said his people were innocent. He said the monastery would not survive the winter without his grain. He tried to maintain his former stature, but stature needs a foundation, and his had been taken away. Returning to the Abbey, Martin went out into the courtyard and stood by the well for a long time. He did not feel victorious. He felt heavy. He had to rebuild the farm, negotiate with the villages, put the mills in order, organize the fish ponds, and restore the books to the truth. He did the first simple thing. He took the fragment of the ring from his neck and placed it next to the Abbey seal, so that he would no longer wear it as a secret, but leave it as a sign that belonged to the cause, not to the man. From that day on, the work began. Pierre, the kitchen boy, became an assistant accountant. He quickly found the wrong fractions, and his hand became steady. He was no longer chased away from the courtyard, and he no longer smelled only of onions, because paper also leaves a smell, tart and dry. He checked the scales at the market and convinced the shopkeepers that dishonest measures hurt everyone. He did this quietly. He had been considered underappreciated, but now he had become useful and confident. Ivo, the old bell ringer, got a new job, watching over keys and locks. He didn't just lock the doors, he described each handle, made marks, kept track of movements, and made a simple table for the gatekeeper, where it was written who had the right to enter where and for how long. He saved more than just that night. He established an order that made the night a place where strangers no longer walked. People began to talk about him as if he had always been needed. The woman from the tannery received an order for a new fence for the scriptorium. Brown, flexible, reliable, so that mice couldn't climb over it and people couldn't hide knives in the boxes. Her experience, previously considered rough work, became part of the overall defense. Ludwig, the merchant, kept his word. He helped get iron for the gates and negotiated with the neighboring town for grain sacks. He explained that a stable abbey was beneficial to everyone who traveled between markets. He didn't ask for much, but he always showed up when the sacks started to tear. He became that unexpected benefactor who did not come with a solemn speech, but simply put things in order and moved on. Senor Osborne did not disappear from the district. His house remained. His people continued to go hunting and drink in taverns, but their footsteps became quieter. They understood that the square now loved clear papers, not empty words. A few months later, news came from the capital. The complaint had been rejected, and the bishop's decision had been upheld. This letter was read aloud at the gate to everyone standing on the road with a cart or a sack. But those who bake bread waited for it most eagerly, because bread loves peace and quiet. The work at the Abbey changed not only the farms, but also the people. The shepherd, who had always been considered only a sheep herder, became the senior field worker, because he could see better than anyone else where the land was resting and where it could be plowed. The weaver, who had not been allowed to read books, became responsible for the canvas warehouse and learned to paint it so that there would be no unnecessary cuts. The monk apothecary, who was considered an eccentric, organized the drying of herbs without smoke, because candles with impurities could lead to trouble again. Everyone did their job and did not try to speak more eloquently than they were capable of. Martin rarely mentioned the word kinship. He understood that kinship was not just blood and not just a seal on wax. It was daily work in which the fence kept its shape because it was knitted together. He did not move into the best rooms, nor did he settle in the house with windows overlooking the ponds. He remained in his cell, but people who had previously passed by began to come to his door more often. They brought simple questions: how to divide a narrow meadow, to whom to give an extra goat, how to pay for salt. He answered according to the book and his conscience. Sometimes he looked at the old fragment of the ring and thought about the woman who had left home to avoid the wrath of her guardian. He thought about how her choice, made in fear, had led to an order that would not have existed without that fear. He did not call it a miracle and did not say unnecessary words. He simply gave thanks that one morning had illuminated the right stone in the wall. One winter, when the snow lay deep, a traveler came to the monastery. He brought a small piece of the same fabric with a falcon on it. He said that his mother had kept it for years, and told him that if fate brought him to these lands, he should give it to the Abbey. He knew nothing more. This scrap did not add new rights or take away old ones. It was just the last thread that could be tied to the common braid. The people at the Abbey placed it next to the first one, like placing a second stone on the edge of a well to keep the clay from spilling out. Years passed. The square saw fairs without distortions. The mill saw even lines, and the ponds saw fair division. There were fewer evenings with smoke and fewer morning quarrels at the gate. No one said that everything had become perfect. There were always people who wanted unlimited profits. There were always knives and long shadows. But the general order worked. And when one of the new brothers asked if it was true that the black monk was the legitimate heir to the Abbey, the elders answered without fanfare. They said that one man found the charter, another gave the pledge, a third heard the wrong step, a fourth remembered the seam on the sheet, a fifth counted the fractions, and a sixth rang the bell at the right time. They said that these simple actions had led to a great turning point. They said that justice had been done not because of a miraculous sign, but because each person had done their part without unnecessary words. These words were spoken quietly but firmly. They lacked literary beauty. They had a clarity that was enough to live on. Martin did not become the founder of new houses, nor did he leave behind lavish inscriptions. He left a simple note in a book. The charter has been found verified, guardianship restored, income organized, candles to be purchased only from trusted suppliers, keys to be kept by the bell ringer, accounts to be kept by Pierre, goods to be purchased from the merchant Ludwig until the spring market, fabric and seams to be checked by the tanner. This entry looked like an ordinary list of household matters, but it contained the whole story. Thus ended the story that began with a streak of light in the scriptorium. It ended not with thunder, but with order. People went about their business, the bell rang again for evening service, and the wind blew across the field as it should, evenly, without the footsteps of strangers in the darkness. And it was the right ending for a place where books are kept and bread is baked, where moderation is practiced and the tears of others are remembered as well as one's own.